Thank you very much indeed, Sean, ladies and gentlemen, Pierce, Joe, ladies and gentlemen. It's good to be back in Donegal. I note that Sean had a difficulty with my title at the start of the meeting, and he's not alone in that. When the Taoiseach rang me to offer me a job in government, firstly I thought it was very generous of him given our difference in the previous year. It restored my faith in the notion of forgiving gods as against vengeful gods. But he rang me and he said, Brian, I have a job for you. And I said, thank you very much, Taoiseach. And, well, there's three bits to it. You're Minister of State of the Department of Finance, and Minister of State at the new Department of Public Expenditure Reform, and Minister of State with responsibility for the Office of Public Works. So this was fantastic. And the next evening I represent a very working class constituency in Dublin South West. They don't stand on ceremony much, you know. So the next day I was out in my constituency and I met Mrs. Murphy. So Mrs. Murphy said to me, I see they gave you a job in government. And I said, yes, I know, isn't it extraordinary? And so I said, what job did you get? She said. So I said, I'm Minister for State of this and Minister for State of that. And she said to me in brilliant Dublin wit, immediately replied, she says, you have more offices than Colonel Gaddafi. Now, I thought it's a fantastic way to look at life. There's a lot of talk about how we're going to prepare the country to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the 1916 Rising. And there's a big debate how we do this and how we include people, how we exclude people. And I think it's right that we have that debate. But for me, one of the defining moment of modern Irish history wasn't 1916, wasn't 1921, wasn't the War of Independence, wasn't the treaty. It was the great moment when Fianna Fáil took over from Cumann na Gael in 1932-1933. Because the state really came of age, a party that had lost the Civil War, the violence, the bitterness, the bloodshed, the division in families of the Civil War, within 10 years would take over from Cumann na Gael, the party that had to found the state and the institutions of the state. And there's a lovely story told by James Dillon at the time. He, of course, was elected in 32. As he said at the time, he put De Valera out and he put him in to put him out, he said. But Dillon tells a little story that at that occasion, when they all assembled in the Dáil, there was old boys going in with revolvers and guns, expecting that the Free State Army wouldn't be loyal to the new government. And his description was lovely. He said, what happened? Mr. Cosgrave handed over power to Mr. De Valera, and we all went home for our tea. And that was, in my view, a political reckoning as never before. It was the great thing of this country that people could move on and put the bitterness behind them. Now, it's taken some of them 60 or 70 years to put the bitterness behind them, but nonetheless, we made a good start. And I think the most recent election was a kind of political reckoning, because politicians, of course, tell you that the reason people vote for you is because of the brilliance of your candidature or the brilliance of your policies. It's not, of course. Every election, in the first instance, is a referendum on the current crowd in office. And the most recent election was a referendum on Fianna Fáil, and the public spoke. And we all know that. But I think the mandate that's been given to ourselves in the Labour Party, the new government, is really twofold. I think in the first instance, as I walked around the doors of my constituency, when I met people who said they were going to vote for change, they didn't know the detail of our manifesto. They didn't know every letter that we were proposing. Some of them did, but the great majority of people had a simple request. Do what you can to sort this out as soon as possible. And the second part of our mandate was to introduce widespread political reform in this country after the collapse, because there's a recognition that the political system also failed this country. Now, there was one decisive moment in the election campaign. It was in the last week, because at that stage it looked as if Fine Gael could actually get an overall majority. But in the last week there was a decisive swing towards the Labour Party. And the Irish people, in their wisdom, were effectively electing a national government with a great big fat majority in the Dáil. Why? Because the Irish people in their wisdom know, because of the difficult decisions that have to be taken, a massive majority is required. A national effort is required. This isn't politics as usual. And if you look at the composition of the Dáil and look at the new deputies who are supporting the government, effectively up to 2/3 of the Assembly there, what you see is a determination of the Irish people to see if we can sort this problem out in our own way. And I say that because the last time we were in office, the time in the early 80s when we had 5 years between 82 and 87, we were given a mandate to clear up an appalling mess that was the legacy of the Lynch government in 77, when the country came close to national bankruptcy, where we had massive high inflation, massive rates of immigration and unemployment. And we were given a mandate then and we didn't do it. We failed to do it. We kicked the can down the road to another generation. In 1991 I left college. Half my mates at that time emigrated directly from this country. We think of the 90s as some brilliant time. In the early 90s times were tough. And it seems to me that the historic ambition of this new government has got to be in the first instance to correct our public finances, as appalling as they are, as difficult as they are, and to bring back some stability. And I think there's an absolute unity on the part of the government in attempting to achieve that. Now, I know that the idea of independence is something very strong in our people. All you have to do is look at the recent visit here of Queen Elizabeth, President Obama. The country had a sense of pride again in itself, pride in what we had become, and a yearning to get back that independence that had been so ruptured as a result of the bailout and the events that led to the bailout of last year. And I don't need to tell people in this room that the lender of last resort is in this country, that our position is difficult. And I want to be also blunt with people. You know, previously, the success or failure of a government was based on your programme for government commitments, whether you could achieve this, that or the other over the course of a 5-year term. Being blunt about it, the success or failure of our government is based upon whether we can get this country back to the markets, to get independence back to this country. That's the historic task that we face as a government, to see if we can achieve that, to obtain the kind of sovereignty that people yearn for in this country. And I think it is something that we need to be clear about. Yes, we need to be clear and plain speaking in what we have to say. In the last 3 years, our economy has collapsed by 15%, unprecedented for developed economies to see that kind of acute adjustment over such a period. Then the nightmare of that isn't numbers. The nightmare of that, ladies and gentlemen, are the 300,000 extra people who have no work. That's the nightmare as you go around Pierce's constituency, my constituency, and you have to listen to people who want the opportunity to work and see the appalling situation that they have got to face. But we also need to be honest about what we did wrong. And the opposition, including Fine Gael at the time, need also to take some responsibility in the fact that we didn't stand up to the pro-cyclical policies of McCreevy and Bertie Ahern, which collapsed this economy. We didn't do it, and I'll be honest enough and straight enough for people to say that. And we have got to recognise that that legacy, where effectively public expenditure doubled over a period of 10 years. When you look at some of the numbers here, Dan O'Brien said it very well the other day. He was making the point that in each of the years before the 2002 election and the 2007 election, public expenditure increased by 18% in 2001 and by 14% in 2006. Surprise, surprise. The next year was an election in both cases. When we look at our debt situation, and I agree with you, I don't accept the doomsday scenario that it will be 200 billion. Of course, who knows? But the reality was in 2007, we owed 37.5 billion. This year, we owe 122 billion and rising. An appalling situation. So that none of this is pretty. It's dreadful. But the only way we're going to get out of this difficulty is to be clear as a government in attempting to fix the deficit and, as I said, to bring the public finances back on track so that we get this country to a better place. Now, Ireland is one of the most globalised economies in the European Union. We don't have huge natural resources. We depend, as Joe said, on our exports, and they're doing very well. If you look at the success of the IFSC, about 8% of GDP comes from the success of the International Financial Services Centre. Employment up there 9% last year. We are a very globalised economy. 250,000 jobs directly relate to foreign direct investment, directly and indirectly. And the idea that we can give some collective two fingers to the international community with such an international profile is just daft, quite frankly. I make the point, I've heard people talk about Iceland and Argentina as if they're some models that we should follow. We are in the European Union. If we were to tomorrow leave the currency, I don't know how we could do it, leave the euro, effectively our debts would double because effectively you would have to devalue your currency. Iceland was able to put extraordinary stops on inflows and outflows of capital coming into their country. If that were to happen, foreign direct investment would dry up overnight. So we are a highly globalised economy depending on the international success or failure of trade. So I don't accept the politics of ourselves alone comes straight from, as I described, the North Korean School of Economics. It's not the answer to Ireland's difficulties. And for those who talk about a voluntary withdrawal from the euro or a forced exclusion from the euro, and those who speculate about the collapse of the euro, they should be very afraid of getting what they wish for. Now, Europe has made many mistakes. Joe spoke about the cheap money that came into this economy for a 10-year period. And not enough was done with the architecture of the euro when it was first established. And I accept many mistakes were made. But I'm absolutely convinced I would much prefer to remain within the euro and deal with our difficulties as part of a large global entity by comparison to paddling our own canoe effectively. And I was also very impressed about 6 weeks ago to hear the speech given by the German finance minister, Wolfgang Schäuble, in the Bundestag, when for the first time a European leader spoke about the importance of European solidarity, said the difference that was made to the German economy as a result of the euro, and the responsibility on the part of Germany to shoulder that responsibility in terms of working out a solution to this European problem. I agree with A.J. Schoper. This is a European solution that we need to this European problem. Now, the political choice for Ireland is fairly clear. We fight our corner in Europe, or we go back under Britain's skirts. The government is pursuing and has pursued a very vigorous diplomatic offensive within the European Union since coming into office. We have made progress, and I know that progress is due, in part at least, to the situation in Greece and to the enormous difficulties that they face there. But renegotiation is a process rather than an event. Now, they said it couldn't be done, and they were wrong. The previous administration told us that the terms of the bailout couldn't be altered. They were also wrong. Virtually everything that Fine Gael and the Labour Party argued for, campaigned for in the context of the recent general election, was delivered in the context of the New Deal launched in Brussels last Thursday. And I would make the point that a lot of hard work from our civil servants, from our diplomatic staff and from our politicians has gone in to making a case for Ireland. Because the most difficult task we faced in coming into office was the extraordinary reputational damage done to this country over the past number of years. And I think that the clear speaking on the part of the Taoiseach, the Taoiseach, Minister Cretin, many other ministers, everyone singing off one hymn sheet, as it were, has helped in getting our points across to the European Union. Now, people have said, we want some of Greece. If Greece can have PSI, private sector involvement, why can't we? I don't see any advantage, quite frankly, in going down the road of Greece. It's a bit like, the probation services in Ireland at the moment. But Greece is in institutional care. and will remain in institutional care for a very long time, as every decision in Greece has now got to be supported 24/7 by a group of people from the EU Commission. I don't see a path through for this country in following what has happened in Greece. And of course the difference between Greece and Ireland is absolutely clear in terms of the scale of our economy, the international nature of our economy. So I see this opportunity from last Thursday as a window of opportunity to fix our problem and to see how we can continue to negotiate this. This is not a sprint, it's a marathon. Renegotiation takes time. Who knows what's going to happen in 2 weeks with this international recession, let alone in 2 years' time. And I think politicians need to be nimble and clear and have an ability to negotiate at the highest level to get what we need in terms of fixing our problem and addressing that. What's the elephant in the room? The elephant in the room is the 18 billion hole in our public finances this year. Some people before the election argued that we should come into immediate balance. And an immediate balance requires an adjustment this year of 18 billion and not 6 billion. Now, I know and you know the kind of devastation that will lead to within our country and across our society were that to happen. So we have got to stick to our plan, which is set out in the programme for government, of trying to get to the deficit target of 3% by 2015, and that's going to be difficult, but it means at least in 2012 a budget adjustment of at least 3.6 billion. It may be more if we cannot get the deficit under 8.6%. Now, having said all of that, I think because of the nature of the structure of our economy, the demographic nature of this country, the well-educated young people that are here, small countries, Gareth Fitzgerald made this point, small countries that can go down quickly can come back quickly. And I think we've got to concentrate on the things we can do to boost demand in the economy and to help indigenous export growth, as Joe referred to. The rate of established enterprises in Ireland is about 9%, much higher than in other countries. We have, in recent years, one of the successes of the boom is that the notion of entrepreneurship has established, but unlike other countries. Joe mentioned export-led growth. Hugely successful last year, and it's quite normal in an economy after an adjustment like ours that the export-led growth starts first. And I agree with Pierce, it's not going to lead to huge additional jobs in the short term, but certainly that is going to be corrected next year, and a slow growth pattern in employment thereafter. If one looks at foreign direct investment, we're very strong. It's increased by 20% in the first half of this year. Cost competitiveness in the Irish economy has improved. There are indications that the tourism sector is recovering well, and I do think that the difference we've made on the VAT changes has given some spike to the domestic economy in trying to reboot Irish tourism. Agri-food sector is experiencing an extraordinary growth. The energy sector, both traditional and renewable, is proving to be quite dynamic. And we also see growth in areas like international education, something that we can do. The British have done very successfully. There's no reason we can't do it, get a percentage of that over the course of the next while. I was encouraged to look at a report recently from the World Bank, whereby this country, within the Eurozone, is rated first by the World Bank when it comes to doing business. And I think that's something that speaks about the new entrepreneurship that has grown up in this country. So how long is it going to take? How hard is it going to be? No one knows. And one thing we need to get away from, in my view, is the endless prophecy. No one knows how long it's going to take and how hard this is going to be. But we've got to do what we've got to do. We've got to face it. And I believe there is a real determination, not just in government, but amongst the people, to support the difficult measures we have got to do over the course of the next few years to rebalance this economy and to get people working again. Our people are resilient. They can deal with change. They can adapt well. And I think it is the case. If you speak to people in the European Commission and you look at the 3 programme countries where the lender of last resort is in place, people speak that Ireland has a chance now of getting out of this programme And we've entered this programme to get out of this programme. We have a chance of getting back to the markets. And I think the fact that the additional items in the agreement last Thursday, particularly on the question of credit lines after 2013, gives us the kind of stability that we need within the euro as part of a huge collective entity to reboot this economy and get people back to work. I am hopeful. I'm optimistic. The mandate we have gives me the hope that we can bring this place and our country to a better place. And that's exactly what the Irish people want to do, and that's what we're going to do. Thank you very much.